Welcome back live, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Mythos Milwaukee Show. I'm your host, Rob Moore, podcasting as always from Bucket Works in the Grand Avenue Mall, downtown Milwaukee. Make sure you listen to us live. Click the live button at mythosmilwaukee.com, join the chat, and be involved. We're very honored tonight to have with us a guest who's speaking with us from tomorrow. He's down under. It's Raphael Lataster. He's a professional secular PhD researcher at the University of Sydney and teaches on religion at various institutions. He wrote his master's thesis on Jesus' historicity theories, concluding that historical and Bayesian reasoning justifies a skeptical attitude towards the historical Jesus. Now for his doctoral work, Raph is analyzing the major philosophical arguments for God's existence and attempts to demonstrate the logical improbability of theism. He explains much of his research in his book entitled There Was No Jesus, There Is No God. Please welcome Raphael Lataster. How you doing, Raphael?
I'm doing very well. Good morning, America. Or is it good evening over there?
Good evening, Australia. We've interviewed a number of British mythicists, and you and my friend are the first mythicist from down under. Is it a popular? I guess it's probably not very popular anyway. Is it gaining any kind of a foothold down there, or is it even more fringe than it is here? Tell us about mythicism in Australia.
Well, you're right. It's not a very popular view anywhere, but it seems to be quite popular amongst certain atheist groups. I haven't really faced a lot of opposition here. There's a few Australian Christian scholars that have definitely opposed me, but I seem to get a lot of support here, which ties in really nicely with our links to Scandinavia. Scandinavians also seem to be a bit more open when it comes to questioning religion and questioning Jesus' historicity. And in Australia, we have a lot of similarities to Scandinavia with regards to education, social justice, and things like that. And I think Australians in general are quite open to questioning Jesus' historicity as well, while it is a very, very fringe position in academia and also in the general populace. Here, fellow atheists generally have been quite open to it, and even my fellow religious studies scholars in Australia have been very open to it, which was very much a surprise. I expected to be the social pariah, the academic pariah, and I've got a lot of support from my colleagues, and I was really shocked at that, pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, good for you. It seems like there's a real kickback here, and it's not very surprising with the conservative Christian demographic that we play host to here in America. But of course, you yourself, it says here, came from a fundamentalist background, so there must be fundamentalists in Australia. Tell us about that. Where'd you start, and how'd you get out of that business?
Oh, sure. I was. I had such a conservative background that I didn't even go to church. There was a religion of two, my father and I, because I suppose when you believe that much as we believed, you figure out that all churches are evil. They're all doing the wrong thing. They're not doing what the Bible says to do. So that's how serious I was about religion, that I wouldn't even get along with fellow Christians, which is, I guess, like an extremist, I suppose. And it's definitely a view that makes sense if it's all true. You can see why people become extremists. I mean, they honestly believe that it's true. So I wouldn't criticize them for that, for sticking to their convictions. I would criticize them for how they came to believe that those things are true, and why they come to believe that other faith traditions, other ways of life, why they are not true, why they're not valid.
And is it more? Go ahead.
It was a very interesting upbringing, a religious upbringing, and I got out of it. Basically, uni happened, university. I think you call it college over there. There, I did science, so I got to learn about this wonderful thing called evidence and the scientific method. and trying to figure out how we know the things that we know. I didn't do philosophy, unfortunately. I ended up doing philosophy later. That would have just made everything a lot quicker. But I learned about evidence, and evidence became important to me. So I started looking at the evidence, and my faith started to die when I did that. And also, I was impressed with a friend of mine who was an atheist, and I noticed that religious people I knew, friends and family, they were not very nice people, while my atheist friend was sort of very, very passive about his atheism, and certainly not like a proselytizing Christian. And I saw in that person a person of really good morals, a person that I could model myself after. It's quite an amazing experience when you as a religious person can look at an atheist who's meant to be a baby eater, a virgin sacrificer, devil worshipper, etc. And you think, wow, they're a better person than I am. They're a much nicer person. They're a much more useful part of society. They're just better. And I'm not the only one I wasn't the only one to think so. I have Muslim friends as well who have lived in countries where there's conflicts with other faiths, and Muslim friends have said to me, "Gee, I had a Buddhist acquaintance, and I just look at them and I think, wow, they're a much better person than I am." So that's an amazing experience as well, to go through that, because you think your religion is supposed to make you a really good person.
It sounds like your logical mind was just too strong, really, to hang on to the belief system when you were faced with actual knowledge and learning. How do we get through to the people who simply put up a wall? There are people who will look at the same evidence and simply deny. Is there any way of changing their minds? Are you about changing their minds? Are you just into it for the research? How do we address that?
It's very complex, especially as I am a scholar of religious studies. So it's very different from the very vocal atheist view of, yep, religion's bad, that's that, you're an idiot if you believe. It's a lot more complex than that. You have to look at why people are religious, why people choose to be religious, if evidence is even important to them. If they understand what evidence is, if they understand logical argument, if they actually know what the sources say, that sort of thing. It's a very complex issue. There's a lot of people to whom the evidence is simply not important. There's I think a third to half of New Zealand Christians, for example, or church-going Christians, don't even believe in the resurrection anymore. Don't believe in God anymore. So, in other words, there's a lot of atheist Christians out there, people that still like being involved with the church and in the Christian community, etc., and don't actually believe the things that they're generally supposed to believe. So there's a lot more to religion than evidence, especially when there's a broad spectrum ranging from the very orthodoxic to the very orthopractic. There's religions focused more on you believing the right things, which is generally what we associate with Christianity and other theistic religions. And there's religions that focus more on doing the right things, on certain rituals. So maybe more like a humanistic religion, some would say philosophy, like your Buddhisms and your Confucianisms and Taoisms and so forth. So it's very complex, and I think, at least for my space where I have expertise, there's not much point in talking to people that don't value evidence. So I would usually have nothing to say against a Taoist or a Confucian and so forth. What I have a problem with, where I focus a lot of my research efforts and my life and my work in atheistic activism, if you want to call it that, is in the domain of exclusivism. So, and this is basically where you get people that will more likely be violent and become extremists, your ISIS people and so forth. And that is, I think, because of the problem of religious exclusivism. And what I mean by that is where they think that their tradition, their religion is exclusively true. And you generally see this with the monotheistic religions, the Abrahamic religions. So it's basically but Zoroastrianism as well. Basically, where on Team God, everyone else is on Team Satan. There's a definite good and evil. There's a definite good God and a bad God, or a bad figure anyway. And if you're not with us, you're against us, sort of thing. And it's really interesting because that is used as a justification for violence and the most horrifying atrocities. But at the same time, I accept being an exclusivist in principle, or accept that it makes sense to be an exclusivist in principle. It's possible for it to be a rational decision, but that then has to be based on evidence. So it only makes sense to be a religious exclusivist if you have good evidence for it, good objective evidence. If you have bad evidence or no evidence at all, well, it doesn't make sense to be an exclusivist, because there's other religious exclusivists as well, and they think you're on Team Satan and they're on the right team. So it's silly to be an exclusivist, and that's basically what I try and show, because the evidence is so bad, the evidence for God, the evidence for Jesus, and so forth. And by that I mean the Christ of faith, the evidence for the historical Jesus. That question is another matter. I call it a debate among atheists. But yes, it doesn't make sense to be a religious exclusivist unless you have good evidence. So I see it as my job to show people how there actually isn't good evidence. So we shouldn't be religious exclusivists. You can be religious if you wish. You can be non-religious if you wish. But don't think that your view is true and everyone else is wrong, because we don't have good evidence for that.
I was wondering, Raphael, if you can talk to the mythicist position, and how were you first introduced to the Christ myth theory, and what kind of sparked your interest in making a career out of it?
Yeah, okay. I'll start off by offending you. No offense intended, but I think the Christ myth theory is a really, really stupid label. We should not use it. If we're going to call it something, let us call it the Jesus myth theory,
okay,
or the historical Jesus myth theory, because we all agree that Christ is a myth. Okay, that's not what we're disputing. Disputing that is mainstream, Christians versus atheists. That's what we all do, disputing Christ. We are not here, when we're talking about this theory, we're not talking about disputing Christ, we're talking about disputing the so-called historical Jesus, the character that apparently did exist in history and was exaggerated into and evolved into the Christ of faith. So we're not disputing the Christ. That's been done. What we're disputing, and usually it's atheists attacking each other, what we're disputing is the historical Jesus. Christians do get involved, but I always say Christians shouldn't. If you've read my Washington Post article, and I got some flack over that from Christians who completely misunderstood it, my Washington Post article about Jesus maybe not existing actually said that as well. Christians should stay out of the debate. It's got nothing to do with them. If they want to debate with us atheists, then let us debate over the Christ of faith. But this is a debate among atheists. This is about the historical Jesus. So if you want to call it something, maybe call it the Jesus myth theory.
That works.
So the Jesus myth theory is basically... What was that, sorry?
I said that works. That works. We'll go with that.
We get it. Go.
All right. The Jesus myth theory is basically the idea that Jesus as a historical person did not exist. Now, I see this as... I clarify that we're not talking about the Christ of faith. We're starting with the assumption that the Christ of faith is fictional. Okay, and that's why I leave Christians at the door. So this is a discussion for whoever's left. This is a discussion for the atheists and the other non-Christians to say, okay, we know the Christ of faith did not exist. That's the Jesus that was resurrected from the dead. That's the Jesus that walked on water. That's the Jesus that was divine. We know that didn't happen. Now we're focusing on this theory, this relatively modern theory, that Jesus was actually just a person, a human being, and all this stuff about Jesus being God and being the magical man with his magic powers, that's been added on later. Right? So the mainstream scholarly theory, the mainstream secular theory, is that Jesus was just a simple person, a humble carpenter that got executed. And the Jesus myth theory basically says, well, that didn't happen. And people that espouse that theory, people that accept that theory, they're generally called mythicists. And I avoid any discussion about those people misunderstanding what myth means. Let us just be charitable and say by that they mean that Jesus is a myth. They mean that Jesus did not exist as a historical person. But there's a mediating position that doesn't get talked about much, and I'm doing a lot to talk about that. I might be the most vocal person in that area, and that is what I like to call historical Jesus agnosticism. So that's not someone that says Jesus existed, and it's not necessarily someone that says Jesus didn't exist, because I don't think we can prove that. We can argue it's not probable, but we can't prove it. I like to see myself as a Jesus agnostic, or historical Jesus agnostic, I should say. So basically that is, we don't know for sure, and it would be silly to think we do know for sure, since the sources are so bad, to decide either way. But we do have good reasons to question it. And beyond that, maybe I'm a stronger historical Jesus agnostic. I think that actually there are good arguments to say that it's more likely than not that he didn't exist at all. So it's a bit more subtle, and I think that's what makes it a bit more dangerous as well, because it's more likely to be accepted. More dangerous to the traditional views, because it's more likely to be accepted. So, yeah, basically the idea is Jesus maybe didn't exist at all.
Now, you say that there is no way we can know, and for now, and I think that's pretty clear, but do you believe that one day we might? Are there documents still buried in a cave? Can we uncover evidence? Will there be research that does prove more conclusively that he didn't exist?
Mm-hmm. I don't think so. It's possible. It's possible. But even then, it's not going to be with 100% certainty, but in the same sense that nothing we will know with 100% certainty except that we exist. That's about probably the only thing we can know with certainty. But it is possible that some new piece of evidence will come up, some long-lost letter from Peter that says, hey, I'm about to make all this stuff up. That is possible, but I think it's not going to happen. I think that any clear evidence of alternative theories would have long been destroyed, either passively or actively. So I think we'll never get that. Well, the best we can do is, with the Bayesian framework, the whole idea of Bayesian reasoning is try and figure out what probably is the truth, what is the thing we should believe in, what is most probably true based on the evidence that we have. And we can't resort to evidence we don't have. We can only use the evidence we have. And I think the evidence for both sides of the debate, that the direct evidence for both sides, that would be very, very decisive. I think that will always remain elusive. We'll never get that. So the best we can do is what we're doing right now. And I guess that's part of the reason why I find historical Jesus agnosticism such an attractive option, because the records are very poor, the sources are very poor for either view, and we'll never really know for sure. And of course that will upset historical Jesus people, because they think, no, he definitely existed. And it may also upset the mythicists, but I don't think it should. I think it's an important part of the whole point of mythicism, and is going to bring it much more attention and make it more scholarly acceptable, academically acceptable.
I'm fairly new to the mythicist position myself over the past year or so, learning what I can, and as I observe, it occurs to me that that everybody who does what you do is much like other anthropologists are extrapolating conclusions based on partial information. Really, is that a fair assessment of what goes on? Well, yes, because we have to make do with sources that are not ideal. We don't have, for example, any contemporary sources. That really limits what we can say. That being said, then, will there ever be any real consensus? In my humble observations to this point, I detect some real infighting among mythicists, and some conflict that I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. As an atheist, personally, I'm not sure that helps move the movement forward or move the the secular wave going ahead. It seems like it maybe drags the whole thing down into the muck a little bit. Is there any hope for consensus, or can you address that a little bit? The infighting that goes on.
I think there's two important issues there. There's two important issues there. I think if there's ever going to be a consensus on this issue, apart from the consensus that the historical Jesus definitely existed, which is sort of a consensus right now, if there's ever going to be a consensus on the issue, I think it'll be my position, not to put myself out there, but I think it will be my position that, you know what, we shouldn't say he didn't exist, but we have good reasons to think he didn't, and that is enough to undermine the historical Jesus scholars who are atheists and to undermine Christians as well. Because if we can say we can't even be sure that a historical Jesus existed, that's enough to damage their claims, because their claims rely on certainty. So we don't actually have to be able to prove that there was no Jesus. It's similar to the God issue. We don't actually have to prove that God doesn't exist. It's enough for us to say, look, there's a lot of doubt here. There's a lot of room for questions. So, and I think if there is going to be a consensus about this sort of Jesus denialism, it will be that. It will be historical Jesus agnosticism. We can all get together and say, look, we all agree that there's good reasons to doubt it, that we shouldn't be sure that there was a historical Jesus. So I think that could be a consensus position, and that would be very powerful. And that would spread. I see it already spreading. I think I've been a bit helpful in that, in spreading it among scholars. As I said, I've gotten a lot of support from fellow critical scholars that I did not expect, and that will continue. I will be presenting at an important historical conference this year, exposing the dodgy methods of biblical scholars, biblical historians, to people that aren't biblical historians, to regular historians, and showing them how silly and idiosyncratic these methods are. The other important issue you raised was this whole thing about advancing the atheistic movement or whatever. It has nothing to do with that. If that's what people are going to make of it, I don't think they should go that way. This is a historical question. As I said, Christians have already been left at the door. If we're going to debate with Christians, and I do, I enjoy doing that, it should be on the Christ of faith. We can bring up, maybe Jesus didn't exist, but I wouldn't stress that too much. I'm quite happy to assume temporarily that Jesus did exist as a human being, and then just argue for the implausibility of all the miracle claims, which of course undermines the entire Christian faith. So it shouldn't be seen as a religious discussion. It should be seen as a purely historical discussion, and people shouldn't use it, I think, in arguing with Christians. We don't need to go there. And I think that's why so many atheists oppose this sort of mini movement of questioning Jesus' existence, because they realize too, and I acknowledge that, I agree with that, this is irrelevant. This is largely irrelevant. There's still some relevance, but it's largely irrelevant to the greater Christian, non-Christian, or Christian atheist debate. You don't need to go there. It's something you just don't need to do. And especially it does make you look bad when pretty much everyone agrees that you're wrong anyway. So there's no need to go there. If you want to focus on criticizing religion, you don't need to go after the historical Jesus. I do it because it's an interesting historical question.
There's no need to go there, but were mythicism able to actually prove or come pretty close, that would be a powerful weapon for the atheist movement. So I'm not sure I'm tying it directly together, but it seems to me that and as you said, the socially accepted position is that Jesus existed in some form historically and was then mythicized over time. Do you see an end game there where you hope that will change, where eventually Christians and non-Christians and historians generally agree with the Jesus myth theory that he didn't exist at all, and that doesn't necessarily threaten Christian dogma, really, when it comes down to it? Do you see that as being something that you're working towards, or you're just in it to research and have fun?
Well, again, there's a few interesting issues here. Certainly, if we could pretty much prove that Jesus didn't exist, that would very much undermine Christianity, but we have enough without going there. We have enough to undermine Christianity anyway. I argue, it's going to come in my upcoming work about William Lane Craig, I argue, for example, with the resurrection argument, the way I attack that, I show how there's a pretty much zero chance that this happened anyway and that the Christian God exists, all the while assuming that Jesus existed. So you can see that even if you could show that Jesus' existence is improbable, it doesn't really make much of a difference, at least probabilistically, to to the whole question of Christianity's truth, because even when you assume Jesus exists, you end up saying, well, the truth of Christianity is likely to be 0.00000000001% anyway. So throwing onto that Jesus maybe didn't exist, it's not going to change it all that much. It has maybe more of a polemical effect, but it wouldn't really have much of an effect probabilistically, because the truth of Christianity is pretty much zero anyway, even if you assume a historical Jesus. And I do think more people will come on board with the idea that Jesus probably didn't exist, especially secular people. And I think that will have absolutely zero impact on many Christians, because we're talking about people that already reject the critical scholars. So what those critical secular scholars believe in will make no difference to the Christian. Whether the critical scholars believe in a historical Jesus or whether they believe that there was no Jesus at all doesn't make a difference to what the Christian wants to believe regarding their Christ of faith. They couldn't care less. So I don't think it will have that much of an impact on them. It will have an impact on the people like me, the very, very, very critical Christians that suddenly become enamored with this whole idea of using evidence. It would of course be very important for those few, but for the bulk of the Christians, I think it will have no impact whatsoever.
And yeah, I agree that in the world of the scholars, it's definitely important to have many people on board. And I think your work, Dr. Carrier's work, David Fitzgerald, Robert Price, so you guys are all doing a great job in that realm. But just to kind of clue you in, and this is what I like to pose to the Mythos Scholars. The reason this show exists, and the reason we did the first atheist conference in Milwaukee, and the reason we went to Egypt and Greece, and all of these things we've done as a group, it was a direct result of, believe it or not, zeitgeist. Now, I know that's a dirty word in a lot of circles, and I'm sure in your circles it's a really dirty word. I understand the issues with the scholarship and some of it. But the other thing that it did for a layman, for somebody that hasn't, dedicated their life to, biblical research or comparative religious research, what it did was it really simplified a lot of this information that we see, with all the different, the various problems with the Jesus of faith and the historical Jesus. One of the things I like to ask all of our guests is, what is another project that the mythicist minds can come together and work on, not necessarily where they disagree, but kind of where they agree? Because there's a lot of common ground that you guys share. What is a project or an idea, or is there something that's already being worked on that we can come together and simplify this information for the layman's? And I hear you're laughing, and I know that's a pretty big question, but that would be awesome.
Well, I'm laughing because, again, there's a few issues here, but I am already involved in with such a project, I think. Okay, so the first thing, zeitgeist, I actually look upon zeitgeist quite fondly. Of course, it gets many things wrong, but it does get some things right. It's based a lot on Acharya S.'s work, of course, the first part of zeitgeist. And again, there's a lot of things about her work that you think, what, really, are you doing this? But there's definitely things she gets right. So I think I agree, it's very important, and I find it interesting that you admit that it helped you and a lot of your mythicist peers get into mysticism. And I say the same thing, I'm quite open about that. David Fitzgerald and Acharya S. have been influential in getting me interested in mysticism. Even if they're not PhD scholars, they're not perceived as being experts in the field, etc. They have done great work in promoting mysticism, bringing it to the public.
We agree 100%.
And that's a big part of the reason why I myself, as a serious scholar, got into it. So it has been influential. It had its place. It's important for that. They don't get everything right, but they have done a great job in popularizing the idea, and I think that's very important. It's very commendable. So I don't look upon such people so negatively as other mythicists who maybe just really want to promote their own work. I look upon them with some fondness. And I focus on just trying to be as scholarly about it as I can. especially since I'm working a lot in the scholarly field. And then simplifying things a little bit and bringing it out to the public. And maybe what you said is something I am working on. I hope to have it finished in a few months, but I'm working on something that looks at this from several angles, and of course espouses my historical Jesus agnosticism. So it's a view that is maybe not strong enough for some ethicists, but is a view that will be, again, bring it more to the people, bring it more to scholarship, get more attention because of such a more nuanced view. And I'm working on that with another very big name ethicist. So I think this is something that will bring a lot of, harmony to this area, if you can call it, to this field, if you can call it a field. So something that a lot of us can get behind and think, yeah, gee, that's really good. You've just done something really, really good and important there and influential. So I think something along the lines of what you just outlined, I think that's sort of happening right now. And I hope to be able to say more about it in a couple of months.
Well, that's good to hear, and please keep us in mind to help us, or to help you spread it as much as we can on our end, because we do see it as a field and a legitimate field, and and one of the things for us when we like to focus on some of the dying and rising God parallels, and you see various gods being crucified and resurrected and turning water into wine and all these things because I mean we have these stories, being in the U.S. so ingrained into us, whether or not our parents were religious or not. I mean, just the society around us, knowing the Jesus story, knowing, Lucifer and, all the, just the whole thing, Christmas and all that. I mean, we have these stories, whether we like it or not, ingrained into us. And I think, the logical people, when they start to see, oh, wait, this story happened in, Babylonia, or this story happened in Zoroastrianism. I mean, we start to see that makes more sense, because when you look, especially if you look at entertainment, and I like to bring this up when we have conversations, but just in entertainment alone, you see how one movie, you have the first part of the movie and then you have the second part of the movie, and it's essentially kind of the same story, but they changed it to match the time that it's being shot in, or the society around it. So
so you mean you expect some changes because it's a different time and a different people. I think that's quite an important area, this whole parallels idea. It's quite obvious to religious studies scholars like myself that one religion influences another. We see it all over the place with all different religions. Why would we not see it with Christianity? And I say that to the Christians out there and to certain mythicists that are quite negative towards these pagan parallels, probably because maybe sometimes a bit too much is made of them. But there definitely are valid parallels with Christianity and earlier faiths. It would be ridiculous to deny that. They're definitely there. Each religion
and I think
has been influenced by another.
Yeah, and I think it also simplifies it again for laymen that don't spend hours upon hours every week, researching various historical texts to see the primary sources. I mean, if you can offer up something that people can identify with, and it kind of puts two and two together for them, I think those are the things that we should be focused on. It's a very important area. And again, even if it doesn't help you with probabilistic calculations, it has that polemical effect. It just wakes people up. I mean, people aren't always impressed with maths. I am. I like maths, but the general population, they're not going to be so interested with whether you've moved the position from 40% to 38%, which we'll be celebrating over. They're going to be interested with, wow, you want to tell me that Egyptian religions had death and resurrections too? Wow, that has more of an emotional impact. They had monotheism way back then. Wow, who knew? Right.
It's 6:34. You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. The show receives support from Craft, the Kenosha-Racine area free thinkers, serving the very southeast corner of Wisconsin. We're talking to Raphael Lataster. He's a mythicist. He's from down under. He's got an accent. We're going to mimic it for a minute, and then we're going to ask him another question. Rafi, I'm interested to know how you use these mathematics to demonstrate the implausibility of God.
How I use it in mathematics. Okay.
The math that you love so much.
Yes, it is awesome maths. I work with a Bayesian framework. I love Bayes' theorem. Okay, so Bayes' theorem has been used for a long time by very, very smart people, the likes of scientists and code crackers and so forth. But it's also been used in the area of religion. Very intelligent scholars using it in the fields of philosophy of religion, and occasionally used in history as well. And the idea of Bayesian reasoning, which is basically, I think, common sense reasoning, is that you look at the evidence and the theory and you see how they fit together. What's the relationship there? How expected is this evidence if this theory is true? And you do that with a number of theories. And that doesn't tell you how probable that theory is, or how probable it is that it's true. You also have to look at the inherent plausibility of it. So that's this all-important prior probability idea. Because you think, okay, if you've got evidence and you need it to fit the theory, you just change your theory. You just keep refining it until it fits perfectly. Woohoo, I win. And Christians do this all the time. Christian apologists do this all the time when you bring up things like evil, problem of evil, the problem of hiddenness. They'll just change the theory a bit. Say, evil has to do with free will, so they just changed the theory. Or God has really good reasons for allowing evil and really good reasons for not making it very clear that he exists and so forth. So they're changing the theory. Now, that makes the theory better fit the evidence that we see. But that doesn't make their theory more probable, because they've actually just lowered their prior probability. So really, the probability of their theory is unchanged or even lowered, depending on how many excuses and how implausible they are. So it's very important in this Bayesian framework. It's very commonsensical, really. It's just you're looking at how the various theories relate to the evidence, how expected the evidence is on those theories, and how plausible, how inherently plausible those theories are to begin with. And this is used, so obviously Carrier and I use it with regards to the historical Jesus. I use it a lot in arguing against God, so you'll see that when I release my work about Craig's arguments, William Lane Craig's arguments for God's existence, and philosophers of religions and other historians have been using this sort of reasoning as well. It's arguably just a common sense way of thinking. And the idea that you should be applying some sort of probabilistic theory to history, I think, is sound. I mean, if you're not going to argue, if you as a historian, if you're not going to argue that your theory is more probable, what are you doing? What are you doing that's of any value, of any substance? You're just pulling a theory out of your butt and saying, okay, here's a possible theory. Who cares? Anyone can do that. Anyone can say, well, this might have happened. You know, the flying spaghetti monster might have created the world. That doesn't tell us anything useful. What you need to do is show that your preferred theory is the most probable one. And yeah, I'd like to see you do that without any sort of mathematical reasoning. I mean, it's all in the word, isn't it? Probable. Once you're doing that, you're talking about probability. You're talking about maths. So you need to do some sort of probabilistic calculation to put forth your theory as the best. If you're not, you're just really talking about possibilities.
We have a question from a listener. It's Kristen. She wants to know, and I guess this makes sense, if Jesus never existed, how do you feel Christianity originated? How did it get started?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so firstly, we need to remember that there's plenty of religions that start without the important claims being true, and even Christians will acknowledge that, because how do you explain all the other false religions out there? But I jump on board with the idea of the celestial Jesus. I think that's quite a plausible idea. I think it really fits well with the earliest evidence we have. Basically the earliest sources, the writings of the earliest Christians don't make it clear at all that Jesus was a human being on earth. And we have to understand that they're working in a time when people did believe in gods and godly beings running around doing awesome stuff above the earth. So I think the celestial Jesus idea is pretty sound. You know, Paul's our earliest source. And again, he never makes it clear that Jesus was a person on earth. Some things he says just makes you really think, aha, he's definitely talking about this happening in an upper realm. Like the verse about how the archons killed Jesus, and the archons even scholars that have nothing to do with questioning Jesus think, yes, that refers to the demons, the sky demons. So it doesn't portray it as this historical event like the Gospels do. Jesus is here being crucified. It portrays it as, okay, there's these sky demons killing Jesus in the sky, or some realm above the earth. There's certain verses like that that's really, you get your head scratching. I think there's also nothing in Paul and some of the other epistle writers too that really links Jesus to earth, to Jerusalem in the first century. And when they mention their sources, it's always God. Their source is always God. So even if they did believe that Jesus was a person on earth, we really have no reason to trust them. Whenever Paul mentions, hello,
we're still here.
We're still here.
Oh, something happened. Whenever Paul mentions his sources, it's always his direct revelation from God, which of course is a very, very dodgy source. But that just, again, portrays Jesus as this celestial being. It's not a human on earth talking to Paul. And Peter and James and so forth. It's a celestial being communicating to them through visions and so forth. And it's also the Bible. They're looking at people like Paul, these early Christians. They're looking through. And by the Bible, I mean the Old Testament and the intertestamental writings. They're looking through the old scriptures, looking for clues that are relevant today. And this we know because of the intertestamental literature, which many Jesus scholars aren't that aware of, unfortunately. If they did, they'd be much more open to this idea, I think, that Jesus maybe didn't exist, this celestial Jesus idea. They're looking through the sacred scriptures for clues that are relevant today. And this is what a lot of Jews did. They tried and find new meanings in the old teachings. And you think, well, why are they doing this? Why would Paul know everything about Jesus from his hallucinations sent by God and through looking through the Old Testament, hundreds of years earlier? Why doesn't he know stuff? Because he talked with Jesus' friends and brothers and colleagues, and because he saw it himself, you know what I mean? Or because he had a historical source in front of him. He knows all this stuff because of these really, really suspicious sources, direct communication of the divine and indirect through the scriptures. So it's just really, really bizarre. This doesn't fit with the idea of historical Jesus, but it fits perfectly with the idea of this celestial Jesus.
It makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm going to put you on the spot here because I looked up, we're looking for you on Twitter, and found an article by a chap named John Dixon. Is that the name that you know? He
this is one of these Aussie Christian apologists.
Well, he shocked me with what he wrote.
He what, sorry?
He shocked me with what he wrote because in looking into this, the short history that I have looking into mythicism, it seems fairly apparent that whether we can ever say for certain that Jesus didn't exist at all, there really just isn't any evidence whatsoever that he did exist. And the evidence that this guy points to in the article is again, it's just what Paul said or to say. There's really, but how is he? How is he so offended by this research? And does he have any leg to stand on in denying and calling mythicists anti-vaxxers? He basically
Dixon very much just embarrassed himself, I think. That was a truly terrible little piece that he wrote about my Washington Post and Conversation article. He really embarrassed himself, saying things, criticizing me for saying that the Gospels are anonymous. I mean, that's mainstream scholarship. If he doesn't know that, then why is he even opening his mouth? This is just embarrassing. How can he be an expert on that and not at least acknowledge that mainstream secular scholars do see the Gospels as anonymous? Not only do they see the Gospels as anonymous, the Gospels are anonymous. Go read the manuscripts. Right. Do you ever see, by the way, my name is Matthew? No, you never see that. You never see that. You only get John talking about, I'm the guy Jesus really liked. That's it. No one tells us their name, why they're such experts, why they're such great historians, etc. They are anonymous. So Dixon just embarrassed himself, and I'd like to debate him. He's constantly rebuffed my attempts to debate him, but he embarrassed himself. And it's interesting reading the comments because another professor wrote there, and they said this is really disgraceful, the disdain that Dixon shows for one of his former students for daring to disagree with him. And of course, Dixon made a whole big thing about how I was a former student of his and how I am a former student of his and how he would have failed me for this, blah, blah, blah. He actually wasn't. I I showed up a few times in his lectures as an auditing student, so just to see what's going on, see what this guy has to say. And I pretty much spent the whole time asking difficult questions and placing my palm on my forehead. So, yeah, I didn't really learn anything from him. So I think he exaggerates a bit in sort of presenting himself as my master. I mean, that's just, far removed from the truth.
Wow. Well, I'm glad we gave you the opportunity to right the wrong there. That's great. I appreciate that.
How did you hook up with the Washington Post? How did that happen? We've got dozens and dozens of mythicists. Well, not dozens. We got 3 or 4 mythicists in America. How did you hook that up?
Yeah, that was completely unexpected, completely random. I wrote a piece for an Australian site called The Conversation, which is a way for Australian scholars to connect with the public and bring their research to general audiences. And they have an agreement with others that other sites, other news sites, can just reprint their articles without any problems, without having to get permission and so forth. And a few did so, a few small ones, and then, here's this Washington Post, this little publication known as the Washington Post, that decided to do it as well, and suddenly the article has gone to 1 million people and broke the comment counter because they don't allow that many comments. I was just amazed that happened. I mean, no one contacted me, no one told me. I just saw it on Facebook. A Facebook friend said, "Hey, I saw your piece in the Washington Post." I thought, what? So I had no idea it was even there. So the whole thing is completely unexpected and, of course, completely awesome. Again, it's one of these things that helps bring the mythicist idea to the mainstream.
Yes, yeah, congratulations on that. That's great for
Thank you.
everyone in the field. And I really like the way you talk to the Gospels. The canonical Gospels. The other thing a lot of people don't understand is just how many Gospels there are, and I think when people start to figure that out, that opens some eyes. But I like how you talk to how the Gospels are not eyewitness accounts just by the way they're written. Can you expound on that a little bit as far as them being written as mythology? And you do it.
Yeah.
You're better at it.
Well, there's a lot of indications there that, especially with Mark, which is the most important of the earliest gospel, there's a lot of indications there that Mark's not even attempting to write history, and I think there's a big clue there that we don't know who Mark is, and Mark never sets himself up as this great historian. There's a lot of clues there that this is actually just one big parable. Such as Jesus saying, I'm teaching to you in parables, and this is the key to understanding the parables. And you don't put the pearls before swine, etc. It just sounds so like a mystery religion, like only the people on the inside are meant to know what's really going on, and the people on the outside are just given these myths, these parables, which unfortunately a few of them took to be literal and then formed Christianity based on it. But I think with Mark especially, you can see it wasn't meant to be that way. People weren't necessarily supposed to believe in a historicized Jesus. I don't call it the historical Jesus, I call that the gospel Jesus. And the mainstream scholars think that the historical Jesus evolved into the gospel Jesus. But in my view, the celestial Jesus could just as easily have evolved into the gospel Jesus as well. And there's interesting parts of the Gospels, like they seem like narrators, the authors. They don't seem like eyewitnesses. They're definitely like narrators, omniscient narrators that know things that they should not know. Like they're talking about things that Jesus did when no one was around. So how the hell did you know that? Jesus was alone in the desert chatting to Satan, like that was a real historical event. How did you know that happened?
In the garden,
describing it like it happened, like
in the garden when the disciples are sleeping.
God told him.
The garden as well. The people that were with him were asleep, and there wasn't any time to have any great big discussions about that because it pretty much hit the fan straight after that, and then boom, Jesus is dead. So how the hell did people know this stuff? It just doesn't make sense. They sound like narrators just giving us fiction, and of course not necessarily in their minds like Mark fiction, but just allegories.
Let's see if I can get you.
And of course, sorry?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Finish your thought.
There's a lot, especially with Mark as well, that you just get from the Old Testament. So not only are there parallels with other religions, I mean, the parallels of Judaism are astounding. You can basically make everything. You can see everything in the Gospels as coming from the Old Testament. So it doesn't actually need to have happened. There's no real reason to think these things actually happen. Just about everything you can get from the Old Testament and the intertestamental literature.
I'm going to throw a curveball at you and ask you, if you were to say someone forced you to take the other side, how do these apologists and how do these scholars possibly defend the theory that Jesus existed? Is there?
Oh my God!
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
I pity the person. I feel sorry for Bart Ehrman. I feel sorry for Maurice Casey. Of course, these are the only two people in recent times that have actually written a book defending Jesus' historicity. And this is part of this project I'm talking about. I slam these books. I go through and just tear apart their methods, tear apart their arguments. They're terrible. They have no idea what they're doing. They're not actually doing critical research. It's just absolutely insane. I couldn't do it. It's too embarrassing. I would be an agnostic. If I tried to prove that Jesus existed, I would end up exactly where I am right now. I would be an agnostic. The challenge these people face, so we're talking about atheists. Again, as I say, this is really a debate among atheists. It's the atheists tearing each other apart here. Ehrman and Casey, they're atheists, or Casey was. He's passed away since. But they face the challenge that every day of their life for the past several decades, they're destroying the Gospels. They're telling us how rubbish these documents are. And when it comes to Jesus' historicity, they suddenly have to turn around and say, oh, but they're not that bad. They're telling the truth when it comes to this one issue. Everything else they're wrong. But about this one issue, they're definitely right. And how do you know that? It's presupposition. That's all it is. There's no actual rational argument there. And there's more I'd like to say, but I can't say because I've written an article about it. I'll be presenting a paper on this very important issue in about a month or two in the Australian History Association conference, where I'll be showing the world of historians that biblical historians are doing some really, really dodgy things. And that was accepted by them, so that already was a big move. So we'll see how it goes, and I can say more about it then. And this project coming up in a few months as well. So there'll be a lot more I can say very soon. But the methods of the scholars arguing for Jesus' historicity are really dodgy, and that alone, in my view, justifies being a historical Jesus agnostic. You don't even need a good argument, a good alternative argument about how there may have been this belief in the celestial Jesus. That's extra. And it's great. I think the work there is great. Doherty has refined a good thesis. Carrier has done really well in defending that thesis probabilistically. I think all that stuff is great. But you don't even need it. You don't need it. Without the historicists arguing soundly for Jesus' existence, you are already justified in being a historical Jesus agnostic. So you put all those together, and I think it's a pretty damning case.
Yes, and when that article is complete, please send that our way as well. We'll make sure to get that out. But I think it even gets even more problematic for apologists, Rob, when it comes to Jesus, because if you look in Christianity, how many versions of Jesus there are, and then you get into Islam, there's Jesus, and Mormonism, there's a Jesus. I mean, he really just is a figurehead for whatever story you're trying to sell. I mean, that's so. When it comes to apologists trying to prove the existence of Jesus, which one? Which and you don't countless people name Jesus in Judea, at that time. I mean, it's silly when it.
I have a hard time getting my head around why someone like Bart Ehrman why he would want Jesus to have existed if he's an. I mean, what is there an axe to grind? Is there some kind of subliminal?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, Price had a good idea that there's atheists that want to cling to historical Jesus because it's just one less thing to argue about, and I think there's some truth to that. Why argue about this? We've spent so much time arguing against God, and we're still arguing against God, so why would we adopt this? Let's just leave that alone. So I think that's a part of it. But with the likes of Bart Ehrman, income, really. I mean, their salary depends on the historical Jesus. Believe it or not, presenting the case for the historical Jesus, assuming a historical Jesus, actually gives some validity to Christianity in the academy and with the general population. Even though they're criticizing the Christ of faith, they still give some academic respectability to it. Christians eventually say, look, we may have these slight disagreements over what Jesus really said and did and who he was, but we all agree he existed. So they do get some validity from it. So, and Hector Avalos exposed the field as well, in America especially, of biblical studies. Even the atheist scholars are basically funded by Christians. You know, when you look at the students showing up and the organizations giving them money for their research, they're funded by Christians. So they're not really going to continue to be funded if they say, yeah, it's all rubbish, Jesus didn't exist. They're going to be funded when they say, you know what, there's a lot of evidence here that the Gospels are basically true, and because I'm a historian and I can't touch miracles, I really can't say if Jesus really did the awesome things that the Bible says, so I'll leave that up to you. That gives so much scholarly credibility to Christianity, and it's just completely erroneous and wrong.
It's actually money related. That just seems cynical beyond belief to me. I mean, it doesn't make them any. It makes them just as bad as like the TV preachers that bilk money out of listeners. To me. Yeah.
Certainly, the likes of Carrie and myself aren't in this for the money. Hurting our job opportunities and so forth. Yeah, but the people arguing for Jesus, they got the six-figure salaries and the respect of their peers.
That's one of the things we're trying to change in the atheist communities that we can, affect. You'll hear atheist personalities all the time say, well, it doesn't matter if there's historical Jesus, or it doesn't matter any of that. I don't believe in any of the supernatural. But it kind of does. At the end of the day, they're not fighting to keep Zeus's teachings out of school and, separation of Zeus and state.
Yeah.
So it really does. Once we're able to, get it to where it belongs, get Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all of them, the Baha'i, into mythology where they belong. I think the world's a better place just as a result.
I can appreciate that. I guess it's just one more weapon in the fight against these exclusivist religions. Let us remember that Jesus is also important to Islam. If there's no historical Jesus, that kind of undermines the Quran, where Jesus is one of the most important prophets.
Exactly.
We've only got a couple minutes left. We're talking to Raphael Lataster from Down Under. He's in Australia. What do you got going on next? Tout your stuff for us. You got a couple of minutes.
All right. So at the moment, I'm working on several articles that somewhat undermine Christianity. Didn't intend to be that way, but another scholar has called me a one-man wrecking crew against Christian claims. Didn't intend to be that way, but it just so happens that I don't like dodgy claims, so I do my research there and I release that to the public and to the academy. So I've got this, I think what's going to be a very important and oft-cited paper at the Australian Historical Association conference, talking about how really, really dodgy the methods are of the people arguing for Jesus' historicity. And I'm working a lot of stuff undermining God's existence as well. I've got a few articles. One of them is going to show that theism's probability of being true is effectively 0%, even when you assume a God. So it's even worse when you don't assume a God. Just constantly working on this thesis against William Lane Craig's case. So I would like to debate him one day. I don't think he would. Because it wouldn't bode well for him. But, that is a goal of mine. I would love to be able to do that. He's got a reputation of coming out quite, looking good against atheistic debaters, even the likes of Hitchens and so forth. But I think I do a pretty good job against him.
I'd sure love to see that. Is there a website for you, Rafi? Facebook page?
Yes, www.raphaellataster.com. Or you can Google my name. It should be the first thing that comes up. Just ignore all the other websites. They're all lies. Dirty, dirty lies.
You heard it here. It's the Mythos Milwaukee Show. Thanks for joining us, Raphael, and have a great day. We're going to let you go. And
all right. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Soon. Take it easy.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you.
He's Raphael Lataster from Down Under. Interesting guy. Great talk. And we are having Patrick Harrigan on Sunday at 2 o'clock. Join us then. Thanks, everybody.